Hi there, I'm Kathleen Jasper, and today we're talking about the Pearson Foundations of Reading test, and we're going to break down the overall structure and the test blueprint. We're also going to go through some specific test questions and content, and I'm going to give you some think like a test maker strategies so you can be successful on the test. Let's get started. So we've gotten a ton of requests to do a video on the Pearson Foundations of Reading exam. And many states use this test to assess prospective teachers who are trying to go into the field of reading, but some states use this test just for general education teachers. So there's a lot of different types of teachers preparing for this exam, and some of you are not reading teachers or do not have a reading background. And so this test can be actually pretty tricky for you if you do not have that background. So today we're going to go through the blueprint and the overall structure, but I'm also going to show you some ways in which you can break down test questions and answer them a little bit better than you would if you had not watched this video. So let's just take a look at the blueprint very quickly. You can tell that this is a Pearson exam because they have the exact same blueprint for most of their tests. And you can see that the biggest part of this exam, this 35%, comes from the Foundations of Reading Development. That's the name of the exam. So obviously that's going to be the biggest piece. And then you do have this part 4 here, integration of knowledge and understanding. That's going to be 2 constructed response or 2 essay type tasks here, and that's worth 20%. Now, a lot of people get freaked out about that essay task, but it's actually fairly easy on this exam. We're going to go through that in part 2. We're going to break down these first 3 content categories or sub areas of the exam. And we're going to save this last part for another video. It'll be part 2. So make sure you tune in for that. But for now, we're going through parts 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so let's take a look at part 1 or sub area 1, they call it, on this exam. And this is the Foundations of Reading Development. Now, this is going to be 37%. So it's a big chunk of the exam. And here are the 4 subcategories underneath this major category. We have phonological and phonemic awareness, concepts of print and alphabetic principle, promoting reading development, word analysis, skills, and strategies, okay? Now, in this overview, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into these concepts, but understand that this is a typical reading assessment for reading teachers, and these types of sub-skills are going to be on most reading exams. So I've gone over this many, many times in many videos, and I'll link them up here or here. I can't remember which side, and you'll be able to access those. We will also go in depth here with some practice questions and things like that, but understand that this particular sub area is on every single reading teacher certification exams. You're always going to be asked about phonological, phonemic awareness and phonics. You're going to be talking about concepts of print and promoting reading development and word analysis. Those are just staples in a reading classroom, all right? So really what I want to focus on today is this piece here, because I think you'll find this in a lot of questions. And if we break this down, you will really be able to understand a lot of the questions you see on the test. So I always like to kind of bring out my little phonological awareness umbrella. If you've seen any of my other videos, you've probably seen this graphic before. And this just helps me explain the difference between phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, and phonics. And because they're all PH words, they all kind of get smushed together, and people without a reading background don't really understand the difference. And so this makes it easy for me to kind of show you the difference. Now, this is going to be a staple under that first sub area, which is the Foundations of Reading Development. These are emergent reading skills. These are the types of skills that students who are beginning to read need to really focus on so that they can build that foundation, which is the sub area title, and they can move on to more complex understanding and evaluation of text in terms of reading comprehension and, metacognition and those more high level skills. So these are the basics, and it's really important that you understand the difference between them. Now, when we talk about phonological awareness here, that's the umbrella. So I'm going to get to that in a second. What I really want to focus on are these 2 sub-skills underneath the umbrella. And basically, you need to have phonemic awareness and phonics in order to have phonological awareness. So phonemic awareness has to do with sounds only. Okay, it's just about the sounds in words. You don't need to see the word. You don't need to write the word. You do not need to read the word. You can listen to the sounds in the word and understand what's going on. For example, and I use this all the time, how many sounds in the word cat? You would say k, at. There are 3 sounds in the word cat. I don't have to see the word cat. I don't have to know that it starts with a C or any of that, the letters, syllables, anything like that. I'm just listening to those individual sounds. And phonemes, which is the root word of phonemic awareness, phonemes are the smallest unit of sounds in a word. Now, you can even break up bigger words like phonemic into different segments of sounds. It would be f, o, n, e, m, ik. So 7 sounds, I believe. So you can do that with any of the words, and you don't have to look at the word or see the word. You can just listen to the sounds. When I was becoming a reading teacher, my instructor basically said phonemic awareness can be done in the dark. You do not have to use a pencil or paper. You do not have to see the word. You just have to know the individual sounds in the word. Now, some of the things that we might do for phonemic awareness are exercises like rhyming. If I said to you, what rhymes with hound? You might say found or round, right? You don't have to see those words to know that they rhyme. What rhymes with back, black, stack? You could do that by just kind of listening to the sounds. You might also do an activity like deletion. If I said to you, say the word cat without the k sound in the beginning, and you would say at. That's a deletion activity. I asked you to delete one of the sounds in the words. Or I might say the word cat without the t sound at the end, and you would go ka. Deletion is just a phonemic awareness activity that helps students understand sounds. There's also a substitution activity you can do where you substitute different sounds in. So for example, if I said, say the word cat, but instead of k at the beginning, use b at the beginning. And the kids would say, okay, that's bat. So notice I didn't say substitute the C with the B, because that you would need to see, right? You would need to see the C or see the B. And we don't need to do that. I'm talking about sounds. I'm saying substitute the k sound with a b sound. And that's a substitution activity. Rhyming, substitution, deletion, those are all phonemic awareness activities because you do not have to look at the paper, write them down, or read them. You just listen for the sounds, and this is a sounds-only activity. Phonemic awareness comes first because that's a very beginning type skill that students need. And then we move into phonics. And phonics are sounds-letter relationships. Now, letters are just symbols, right? In the English language, we have different letters that represent sounds. In other languages, they have different symbols that represent sounds. Notice that in the English language, a C can make a K or a S sound, right? So this symbol C, depending on what it's followed by, if it's followed by an E, I, or Y, it makes a S sound. If it's followed by like an A or a U, it's going to make a K sound. That is phonics, looking at the word and assigning a sound based on what's in the word, right? A C followed by an E, I, or Y makes a S sound. A T followed by an H makes a Th sound, but you have to see the T and the H in order to know what sound. So it's very simple here. If you want to know the difference, phonemic awareness is sounds only. Close your eyes. You can, figure out the sounds, but phonics, you have to look at the symbols, see what's near the symbol, and determine what kind of sound it makes. For example, in phonics, this P and H, it's not a phonics, right? We know from our phonics, our rules of letters, when a P and an H are together, that makes a F sound. So that's really, really important when we're talking about phonics. So remember that. Now, once we have all of that, we have phonological awareness, and that's when you're putting sounds, letters, syllables, segments, all of it together and really understanding word recognition. Okay, word recognition. And you're doing that by kind of combining phonemic awareness, phonics, and all of those different skills, putting them together for phonological awareness. All right, so that's how you kind of break it down. I do have another video that goes more in depth on this, and I'll link it up. This will help you in the first sub area of the Foundations of Reading test. Now let's take a look at what that might look like on the exam. So this particular question comes from the Pearson's Foundation of Reading free study guide on the website, and I'll link all of that up below. But I want to talk to you about this particular question because it's a good one. And what we just talked about with the umbrella is going to help you with questions like this. So this comes from their free practice test on their site. Now, you know, if you've seen any of my strategy videos, you're going to think like a test maker and you're going to work backwards from this question. You're not going to start here and work your way down here. You're actually going to start here and work your way towards the question. That's what I want you to do, because otherwise you can get lost in the question. This question is actually kind of short, but you might be able to eliminate some incorrect answers, zero in on correct answers, then read the question, and then get that answer more quickly than you would if you started from the beginning. So if you are interested in more information about working backwards, I will link that video up here as well. Okay. So let's take a look at A, B, C, and D. A, phonemic awareness is the general understanding that spoken language can be represented by print. Well, didn't I just say that phonemic awareness is not print? It's actually sounds only. While phonics requires knowledge of particular letter sound associations, we did say that phonics is letter sound associations. Let's go back to my umbrella. You can see here, letter sounds relationships, right? However, what did we say about phonemic awareness? Sounds only. You can do it in the dark. You don't need to see the word in print. So I'm going to cross off A. A is incorrect. B, phonemic awareness is the ability to associate sounds with letters. Again, that's incorrect. Phonemic awareness has nothing to do with letters. It has to do with sounds only. Crossing it off, I don't even have to read the rest of that answer choice. C, phonemic awareness involves a general understanding of alphabetic principle. Again, alphabetic principle is like print, while phonics includes letter blending skills. This is a hot mess. Absolutely not. D, phonemic awareness is the ability to distinguish individual speech sounds. Yes, remember we said phonemic awareness is all about individual sounds and words, while phonics requires knowledge of letter sound correspondence. Yes, D looks good. Let's go ahead and read the question, make sure we're on the right track. Which of the following statements best explains the difference between phonemic awareness and phonics skills? There it is. What's the difference? And we did it without even having to read the question. So it's important we work backwards. It's important we know the difference between phonemic awareness and phonics. And notice that, you know, if you don't have a reading background, these like skills get mushed together when you're reading this. You're like, phonemic awareness, sounds, letters, like what's the difference, right? But if you go back to that umbrella, remember, phonemic awareness, sounds only, phonics, letter sound correspondence. Remember the P plus the H makes a F sound. You have to see the P and the H in order to make that connection. That's phonics. So if you can distinguish those two things, you'll do very well on this section of the exam. All right, now let's go to sub-area number 2, which is development of reading comprehension. Remember, reading comprehension is the essence of reading. This is where we want students to go. We want students to be able to understand large sections of text so they can, you know, live their lives understanding how to read, understanding how to analyze, evaluate, think critically. All of that has to do with comprehension. Now, before I get into these 3 bullets, I just want to go over some good words you want to associate with comprehension, all right? So like I said before, comprehension is the essence of reading. One thing you need to think about is that comprehension involves critical thinking, okay? Critical thinking is a high-level skill. Comprehension is a high-level skill. We kind of take it for granted because we've been reading for a long time. And so we don't realize how many things are firing in our brains when we're comprehending text. We're forming pictures, we're making associations, we're remembering something that happened in our background knowledge, happened back in our lives, or something else we read at another time. We are, using vocabulary strategies, metacognition. We're figuring out weird words. We're jumping around and looking at the picture and getting meaning from that and going back over here and looking. It is crazy what is happening in the brain when reading is taking place. And we rarely break it down or think about it. So comprehension, I want you to think about critical thinking. I also want you to think about metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about your thinking. And when we teach students how to comprehend text, we are often teaching them metacognition. So when they see a difficult word, we show them how to work through that, how to use your brain to figure that out, how to use the picture to derive meaning. All of that is very, very important in comprehension. So 2 good words that are associated with comprehension are critical thinking and metacognition. So remember that when you're working through these. Now, another thing that's very important is vocabulary development. Obviously, you can't comprehend text unless you have good vocabulary development. Another key thing about vocab is you want to choose things that are in context or context clues. That has to do with comprehension. Stay away from answer choices that are about memorization or writing the word over and over again. Does memorization work? Yes, of course, we're going to memorize vocab. We're going to memorize sight words, things like that. But you have a deeper, more analytical understanding of a word if you use context clues or understand it in context. So remember that. Now let's look at the second bullet. Apply reading comprehension skills and strategies to literary/imaginative text. This is basically stories, literary text. And then the third bullet is apply reading comprehension strategies to informational or expository text. Remember, we want to expose students to both literary texts, which are your stories, your more imaginative type things. We also want to prepare them for that informational text, that nonfiction kind of text that they're going to have to achieve on the exam when they take at the end of the year. But they're also going to need that, to just discern information and to think critically. Both are very important. So don't be one of those teachers that only teaches literary, and don't be one of those teachers that only teaches informational. As teachers, we want to make sure that we are using a balanced literacy approach, meaning we are using both literary and nonfiction texts to help students comprehend. Now, what might this look like on the exam? Now, this is one of our questions from our reading specialist. That's a ETS test, but it's very similar to this test. And this has to do with vocabulary. So here we go. Let's start with the answer choices first. Remember, I'm always going to start there. And it has A, use memorization games to remember words. Do we do this in schools? Yes, of course. Should we answer this way on an exam? No. I'm going to cross this off because it's a bad word. Memorization is a bad word on the exam. B, use morphology to break down difficult words. Okay, we do use morphology to break down words. Morphology is all about, compound words, breaking those apart using prefixes, suffixes, and roots. And that is an effective way to break down words to figure out meaning. So I'm going to leave B. Let's go with C. Use a glossary to copy down difficult words. Oh no. Did we do this when we were kids? Yes. I remember my teacher telling us to open up the glossary and just start writing definitions. Did it work? I mean, probably sometimes, but is it the most effective according to research? No. It's busy work. We know why. The teacher was tired and she wanted to keep us busy. And I get it, but it's not the best strategy for vocabulary. And then D, use context from the content area to learn new words. Now, if it's between B and D, I like D the best because what do we have? Context, and context is on my good words list for vocabulary. Instruction. So B is okay. D is better. Let's look at the question to see if we can narrow it down. Which of the following is most effective when teaching academic vocabulary? Most effective. Now we're talking about academic vocabulary. And when we're talking about academic vocabulary, we're talking about, biology words, maybe words used in social studies that are a little more complex and have to do with a specific content area. And that's why D is best here. Not only does it have this, context word here that I love, but it also has this content area because that goes with academic vocabulary here. So notice that before I ever read the question, I could break this down. I was down to 2 answer choices. And then once I read the question, I could see that most effective came into play, which makes context clues the best. And then academic vocabulary attaches to content area. So that's why D is the best answer there. And now for the third sub area of the Pearson Foundations of Reading is reading assessment. Now this is huge. Of course, we're always using data to make instructional decisions, and we're especially doing that in the reading classroom or in the reading part of our day. So it's very, very important we're using these different types of reading assessments to make decisions. And you can see that the first bullet is formal and informal methods for assessing reading. Well, what does that mean? What is a formal method for assessing reading? Well, that could be a student's standardized assessment scores. You may look over last year's, state test scores. That's very important information. Should that be the only thing you use? No. That tells one piece of the story, not the whole story, okay? You may also use informal methods, things like formative assessment, observations. Maybe you have the student read aloud to you and you kind of analyze what's going on. You may have them do just a quick vocabulary exercise or a quick phonemic awareness exercise so you can pinpoint what's going on. That's informal, ongoing assessment. So formal is going to be more of your standardized criterion referenced exams. And I do have an awesome video about assessments. I'll link that up here as well. But you also want to take a look at informal ways. Informal assessments, in my opinion, are the most important. They are the things that you are doing every day in the classroom. You know your kids best. You know what's going on with them. And so those informal methods really help you to assess what's happening with the student and then diagnose and then intervene when you need to. And that's really important. And the second bullet, multiple approaches to reading instruction. Now, I also think, and I just mentioned this, multiple approaches to assessment. You can't just use one test on one day to determine what's going on with a student. It doesn't tell you the whole story, but multiple assessments will, piecing them together to tell the whole story. And then, of course, you're going to need to do lots of different types of things in terms of reading instruction when it comes to reading assessment. You're going to use that data to make instructional decisions, and what might work for this student over here may not work for this student over here. This student over here may need something else. And that's where you're really differentiating your instruction based on the assessment data that you're collecting literally every day. Now, what might that look like on the exam? Well, this is from our reading specialist practice test. And this is something that I always like to use for people because a lot of times people get caught up with, oh my God, it's a graph. And oh my God, look at these answer choices here. Okay. First, let's not even look at the graph or the question right now. Let's look at the answer choices and see if we can find one that has good words in it. Okay. A, continue with current reading instruction by using the district mandated materials with fidelity because the student showed an increase from December through February. All right, we have district mandated, and while you are supposed to use district mandated materials for sure, it's kind of a bad word on these exams. All right, we really want to kind of stay away from things like mandated. Even though your whole life as a teacher is a mandate, right? Some state mandate, some district mandate. But I'm going to cross off A because it's not the best. It doesn't have the good words in it. B, provide the student with extra independent reading practice at home in order to increase reading skills. Right away, and then it says such as comprehension, vocabulary acquisition. Right away, independent reading, I'm going to cross that off. It's usually a bad answer when it comes to trying to increase reading skills. If students are struggling, they're not going to go home and read independently for an hour. It's just not going to happen. And you want to stay away from at-home stuff on the exam. Do we encourage at-home practice? Absolutely, we encourage at-home practice. However, on this exam, it's really your job to make sure the intervention is happening in your classroom. So I'm going to cross that off for a whole host of reasons. Number one, independent reading is a bad word. And number two, at-home practice is a bad word. All right, and answer C, conference with parents and assist them in implementing an at-home practice program. You may like that answer, right? Because we're always trying to involve parents. However, no, parents are not in charge of your classroom. While we do want to include parents and we do want to encourage at-home practice, this is not something that's probably going to be the answer on the test. Let's look at D. Provide the student with reading interventions, ooh, I love interventions, during the school day to target his specific literacy issues. So we have interventions, target, and specific. All of that indicates differentiated instruction. Just going to abbreviate there. Differentiated instruction is a good practice. Notice it doesn't say differentiated instruction in the answer choice, but those things allude to differentiated instruction. D has all the good words in it. I'm going to grab it. Let's read the question. Given the data, what should be the teacher's next step regarding the student? And we have this data here, and you can see that the expected gains are here going up, but the student kind of flatlined. He was above, and then he flatlined, and now he's below. So something happened here. We don't know what, but what's the best thing to do here? Provide interventions for the student's specific needs, making sure to target his deficits. D is going to be the best answer choice, and I didn't have to look at the graph or even read the question to get that answer. And that happens a lot on these teacher certification exams. So think like a test maker. Don't get bogged down with the graph and the question. Go straight to those answer choices, and maybe you don't get all three of them crossed out and one good answer. Maybe it's narrowed down to two. Then look at the graph. Then look at the question, and you should be able to discern the proper answer there. So this is a really good strategy. I recommend backwards design, working backwards, and checking out those good words, bad words, so that you can locate those good answer choices without ever having to read the question. Okay, and part 4 is integration of knowledge and understanding. These are going to be your analysis and your essays. Now notice that in this part, it says prepare an organized, developed analysis on a topic related to one or more of the following. Your topics are going to be all about the last 3 things we talked about: foundations of reading development, development of reading comprehension, and reading assessment and instruction. So all of those good words that you learn about in these 3 content categories or these 3 sub areas, you're going to want to kind of push those in your analysis in your essay. Now we will go through the integration of knowledge and understanding, which is sub area 4, that's your essay, in part 2 of our Pearson Foundations of Reading. So we went through the main test today and some think like a test maker strategies for that multiple choice. And in part 2, we're going to go through the essay, and we will even share an essay with you so that you can work through that and understand exactly what it should look like when you're asked these questions on the test. Now we have a ton of videos about reading comprehension, teaching reading, phonemic awareness, cueing systems, all of that stuff. And we will link those up in the descriptions below. So make sure you take a look at that. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so, and let your colleagues know that we are here. We're constantly filming new content, and so we want to make sure we're meeting the needs of all of our students by giving you the best content possible. If you have suggestions that you would like us to film, you can throw those in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and have an awesome day.